Hello everybody, I'm Ko O'Neill and I'll be your instructor for Game Mechanics. This is the second class in a 3-class series about game design here at MCAT. You can take the classes in any order, but I recommend you take them all because the first one is about concepting and design, just loosely game ideas and how to build them. This class is more in-depth to the behind the scenes, the mechanics and mechanisms used to make games playable and fun and challenging in terms of balancing and resources and internal economies and that kind of stuff. And then the third class is actually a video game development class where we'll build a game from scratch using concepts and mechanics that you develop. This course is mostly for people who wish to make their own games from scratch or are just interested in the way games work, the inner workings, the behind the scenes of game design. There are lots of texts and videos and writings about game mechanics and philosophies and game theory, and we're going to kind of stay out of the deep water in that arena and mostly stick to the basics or the more widely accepted categories of game mechanics. We'll use a video game engine in this course to actually do some testing and when it comes to balancing and playback as an experimentation tool, but the mechanics, the fundamentals of mechanics apply to all games, tabletop, physical, or computer and mobile games. The course objectives, we'll talk about the 5 main categories of mechanics. There's a guy named Ernest Adams who wrote a book called Advanced Game Mechanics, and it's sort of the standard text on the subject. Explains everything really well. I'll provide excerpts from it that we'll read throughout the weeks, but if you are interested in this topic or if you want to make your own game someday, I definitely recommend picking up a copy of this. So in this course, we'll talk about the 5 main categories of mechanics and establish a common language so we kind of know what we're talking about, vocabulary and whatnot. We'll do that right away in week 1. That's this week. We'll talk about how to implement mechanics into game design to make a game engaging. And I use the term engaging specifically because not all games are actually fun. They're actually kind of frustrating or really challenging. For example, there's a game called Super Meat Boy, which is sort of impossibly hard, and people love it for that reason. There's also a tabletop living card game called Arkham Horror, which isn't really winnable. You don't win when you play through levels. You actually just, it's just how bad off are you before you move on to the next level. And when I was playing that, it actually took quite a while for me to kind of get around that. I kept thinking there was a win condition, but the win condition itself is just survival. So once I kind of figured that out, the game was a lot more fun and less frustrating. But still, that the mechanic is such that it's just how much abuse can you take before you move on to the next level. We'll talk about the difference between rules, mechanics, and narrative. A lot of games are story heavy and don't have a lot going on in the gameplay. Or something like an on-rails shooter like Half-Life 2, where you can solve puzzles and that kind of thing, but there aren't really any options of where you get to go. And if you look at other games that are sort of more open sandbox and almost too loose, where you're not really sure what the story is, you just kind of go around and complete, it's like an infinite side quest game. We'll consider balancing, the game balancing, so that's how easy or hard it is, or how a player can use resources to affect their outcome. That's strategy versus probability. If you have a game that's 100% probability, it's like flipping a coin. The game is more about guesswork and chance, and it still can be kind of fun, but it's not necessarily it's not going to be fun over a long period of time because the player doesn't have any choice, and so player choice is a big component in when we have these discussions. There's also sort of 2 types of games. There's progression and there's emergence. So progression would be, like I said, with Half-Life 2, where the story unfolds and you play through it and you are moving forward and you're given certain resources at certain times in the game. The game is designed that way to make the game either harder or easier based on the resources you have. And then there's games of emergence where you have, like Skyrim, where you start with nothing and you develop over time through the resources that you collect and choose to use your own way. So the game designers have no way of knowing how the players will use those resources. They just provide them in a way that seems entertaining or fun or challenging or what have you. There's also kind of, when you talk about balance, you talk about easy versus hard. So you can make a game extremely difficult, or you can make it easy, or you can make it a skill-based where people can get better at it over time. So something like golf or basketball, if they've never played it before, it's actually pretty hard. And the fun goes away pretty quick in something like golf if you stink at it. But if you keep at it over time and you improve, that's where the satisfaction comes in. And lastly, we'll kind of go over the relationships with a player in gameplay and in content. So as a game designer, you're not only delivering some kind of story or environment, but you're building a relationship with the player that the player comes to trust. So you don't change the mechanics of the game too much during the course of the game. You set up the rules early, and they work within that throughout the game. So you wouldn't suddenly change the gameplay in a first-person shooter to something completely different. There are mini games and little side things like that, but that's different than just outwardly cheating and changing the rules. So we'll cover those topics. The course is divided into assignments each week for 5 weeks. You'll notice that the assignments are delineated by the week number and then the assignment number. So 1.1 or 1.2 would be week 1, assignment 1, week 1, assignment 2. Plus there's a discussion assignment each week, and that happens in the discussion board, which is its own area. So we'll post assignments in the discussion board, but also there are discussion topics, and those will usually be 1.0 or 2.0. And please follow the instructions each week and participate in the discussions, because that's a big part of an online class environment, is communicating with each other and giving feedback on each other's assignments. So a good place to start is to go through the orientation, even if you've taken a Blackboard class before here at MCAD. This is a good warmer-upper. Just make sure that you have all your ducks in a row in terms of being able to post pictures and assignments to the discussion board. Every instructor does their submissions a little differently, and I like to have everything posted on the board so everybody can see it, and then comment directly on that post. So click the start here in the upper left and go through the orientation and take a look at the course information. The syllabus is there, and the instructions for the first assignment. So thank you. This has been kind of a long intro, but I'll have videos each week as part of a lecture for what we're going to be covering and talking about and discussing, and also additional content from the web video series Extra Credits, which is a lot about game philosophy and game theory and in an entertaining animated format. And then also articles from Gamasutra, which is a online resource not only for game information and articles and reference information, but also for jobs. So get familiar with Gamasutra if you're interested in entering the game industry. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next video.